Well, I would like to do two things. First, thank for the invitation, and it's an honor to speak here. And it's a great initiative to come here. It's ironic that I heard that you had your first meeting in the halls of the foreign ministry, but were introduced by the American ambassador. I find that quite funny. What I want to do is basically two things. I would like to share some figures with you on some of the underlying causes of the remaining current account deficits of the key crisis countries, and then make some remarks on some of the key proposals, in my eyes, to get out of the acute crisis of Europe. I think that in the debate of the Euro crisis, widely overlooked is the effects of rising prices in oil, gas, and raw materials. If you look at this graph, you see in blue quarterly figures of the current account deficit of the EU 27, and you see the bill equally in quarterly data of oil, gas, coal, and raw material imports, and these are net figures. So you can see that the current account of the European Union, was negative, fluctuated a bit, came actually down a bit with the crisis. But you can see also that with the building up of the very negative current account before the crisis, behind that was to a large extent increase in the dependence effects on oil, gas, and raw material imports. And we have seen the same development since the very deepest point of the crisis. This was actually caused not by the amount of imports, but by price effects, because the amounts of import were more or less stable over the total time. So this is here in million tons. But if we now look at the key countries about which we talk about at the moment, we can see very interesting correlations. So this is now the current account of France since 2002. So it's getting more and more negative. And if you look at the time since the deepest point of the crisis, so that was beginning of 2009, and compare it with the latest data, so that's third quarter 2011, which is the latest Eurostat figures on oil, gas, and raw material import, you see that actually a large part of the still negative current account of France is because of the increase mainly in oil, but also in gas bills. And we have the same figures for the different crisis countries. So now here's Italy. You can see the same effect. So despite of weak internal demand, in comparison, a strongly increase in the bill for oil and gas and raw material. You have Portugal here, despite demand depression, rising bills, even if not so strongly in oil and gas. And I lost Spain because there the figure is the strongest, where you have very negative developments as well. Here is Greece, where it's surprising to see that actually the bill was cut dramatically in the end of 2011, which is the effect of not paying bills, and therefore the figures cannot be used. And they have large stocks in Piraeus, which they are simply driving down. But what's now interesting is if you compare the four countries for which the data can be used, which are key in the crisis at the moment, Ireland doesn't fit into the picture, I have to say, then you see that the current account deficit in Spain, Italy, Portugal, and France in the third quarter 2011, and compare that with the increase of the bill for oil, gas, and raw material, you can see that a large part of the remaining current account deficit is in fact an effect of growing bill to oil, gas, and raw materials. So it's 63% of the current account deficit in Spain, 56% in Italy, 39% in Portugal, and 65% in France. So in fact, I think it's interesting to see that this has been widely overlooked. George Soros spoke about the importance of climate change, and we had big debates about that before the crisis. Now it became much more silent, although the issue is so burning. And here you can see that there's actually a link. The dependence on oil, gas, and raw material, which is for Europe mainly imports, has a lot to do with the remaining current account deficit. So one has to be more precise. Some of the European countries did not basically consume too much. They consumed too much in the ecological sense. And that's very interesting. And I think it shows what we would need as a solution. And it shows that it's not enough simply to say for new economic thinking, this means basically stabilizing old demand. It would mean to reform the economic model in a way that we get out of this dependency. This means we need strong targets on renewables, strong targets on energy efficiency, and we need to boost investment in order to overcome this dependency. This means also that at the moment some of the measures which we are discussing, like giving more capital to the European Investment Bank in order to allow financing investment in some of the southern countries, like having common project bonds in order to do investment in the crisis countries in order to balance the austerity measures with some investment measures, that this cannot be workable and it cannot be effective if it goes into new airports, new roads, if it goes into new beton-based, concrete-based tourism and the like. Because this would actually increase even more the dependency of these countries on rare fossil fuels and getting more expensive in this respect. And therefore, if we move towards investing in the southern region, which we have to do in order to help rebalancing and getting out of the crisis, it has to go into a Green New Deal, it has to go into investments which help us overcoming this dependency. And I think that's a lesson which is rarely discussed, even if it's called new thinking. In fact, new thinking cannot be new if it's based on, let me say this, if it's based on the old gender relations and if it's based on the old thinking in environmental terms. And therefore, I think it's really worth looking at these links. Of course, this would not be enough in order to overcome the internal imbalances in the Eurozone, because if you reduce the dependence on certain imports, you would expect that there is an effect on the exchange rate and the old internal imbalances would remain. So therefore, all the issues which have been discussed and are being discussed by more progressive thinking will have still some validity and need thorough reflection. And I think it's probably was a quite wide majority opinion here on the panel that something has to be done well beyond the too bad, too late measures which have been taken on the European level at the moment. And there I think it is absolutely crucial that new thinking means also thinking in terms that, one doesn't repeat a certain neoclassical thinking, this is the right model, and we have to follow it because that's the truth in economic thinking. But if you want to implement economic policy on a European level, one has to think at the same time what are potential political compromises between key countries acting. And there's a certain tendency on both sides. So in the German doctrine, I would say the mainstream German doctrine, Wolfgang is of course exempted at that point, but also in some strands of new thinking that one thinks we have the ultimate truth and now the other side has to concede that they have to surrender. And therefore, I think in order to really come forward with solutions which are, in a word, new, it's not enough to be right and have the most efficient model, but also have the model which can constitute compromises between different strands of thinking and different countries in Europe. And if I would like to just mention a few of such potential wins. So there was a big debate, how much, that's fine. If I think about some of the key issues raised here, there was always the issue of transfers. And I think it's clear some transfers will have to be accepted, as it was said by before, or also by Germany and the other surplus countries. On the other hand, The question is, in which form can transfers be done so that it is politically acceptable? And I personally believe that models which would constitute large direct flows will be less acceptable than taking over under certain conditions, certain risks, and that it will also be more acceptable to actually guarantee for investments which will show a way out of crisis in the weaker countries than for the type of flows which we have, for instance, in Germany with balancing differences between the German Länder. Second, I think that programs which help people to migrate and take jobs in the stronger areas, that such type of programs will well be acceptable and could also constitute in some forms of transfers. When it comes to budget deficits, I think we have strong measures taken now to balance on the expenditure side, with very negative effects as being discussed here often, but on the income side there's still a huge potential. So if we coordinate measures against tax evasion, even if we would do it in enhanced cooperation between the countries which want to do this and then negotiate tough with the ones who don't, then there is a big potential for raising income and limit therefore budget deficits and setting free resources for investment. Lastly, the big question how to deal with the debt, with the old debt and the interest rate burden. There I think Marcus' proposal seems much more acceptable than juridically as well as legally as well as politically, but it has a bit disadvantage. It doesn't relieve the countries very much. On the other side, George Soros' proposal was very strong because it has a big relief, but on the other hand, it would be seen, I think, by most Germans as very weak on probably some of the conditioning. Therefore, I think still that the proposal of the German Council of Wise Men of the Redemption Fund is a strong compromise. It would legally be feasible. It would be clear on the condition that each country is still responsible for its own debt, but it would bring down radically the interest rate burden, and therefore I have a strong, I think politically that could fly, also because the German government, if you listen carefully, although it said no to the proposal, it didn't really say no. And therefore I think it would be a big chance to really put, because it has been coming from very conservative economists in Germany, to put really forces behind that, because that's a proposal which could fly politically. And I think we need to use this sort of logic before the French elections and when the French elections are over to come forward with solutions which could be acceptable for the surplus countries and at the same time could fly and help the weaker countries. And there may not be ideological, but we must make the compromises which move political, economic rebalancing in the right direction, but which are politically feasible at the same time. And then new thinking is not only economically new thinking, but at the same time also politically perhaps workable. Thank you very much for listening.